Should the American record in the men's discus be changed? We're going to cover a whole bunch of different aspects behind the American record in the men's discus in the United States, and we're going to start right now. So the American record in the men's discus throw is 72-34, and this throw is an absolute monster bomb, and it's by an individual named Ben Plucknett. And I would say that in the realm of throwing, if you're not a super diehard throws fan, you don't really hear that name come up quite a bit. You tend to hear more like Al Order, of course, Mac Wilkins, John Powell. Like, those are sort of like the men's discus gods from the 70s, from the heyday. And then you get into the 90s, you start to see and think and you hear, Anthony Washington, world champion, and you start to look at these different throwers, but you usually don't hear the name Ben Plucknett. And so who is Ben Plucknett? He sadly passed away, so he was 48 years old. This dude was 6'7", 305 pounds. Now in 1981, Plucknett ended up breaking the world record multiple different times. So he threw 233 in Modesto, California, which is 71-20. And later on, in 1981, he also broke the world record again in Stockholm, Sweden. And so when he was in Stockholm, Sweden, that's when he threw 72-34. Now, both of these throws were removed from the world record list. And so what I want to do now is I want to go into what happened during 1981, what happened with the world record list and that ascending order, and why those records do not uphold, and also mention that Plucknett was the first athlete ever stripped of his world records because of a positive drug test, and that was for metabolite of testosterone. He could have been taking something that just produced this testosterone metabolite, and I believe at this point, I think he had ended up increasing his personal best by over 14 feet in a matter of a year. So let's go into a little bit further detail. One, just thinking about his best throw in 1981 was that 72-34. His second best throw was that 71-20, and then coming backwards, we're going to start to look at what happened in that year of 1981. So here we're going to look at the International Amateur Athletic Federation, now the World Athletics Federation, the governing body, announced this action from its London headquarters, and that action was that they would be removing the world records. So these two world records, one was at that 71-20, which was in Modesto, and then again that 72-34. And let's look at those real quickly here. Okay, so we can see real sweet footage. This is the Stockholm 72-34, and then we're going to fast forward. This is the slow-mo of Ben Plucknett 72-34. That classic, pretty jumpy out of the back, good high point with the discus, real jumpy finish. This last throw, this is his 71-20 in Modesto, so this is the first world record he had, so let's replay that. Here we go. We're going to replay this. We control that high sweep out of the back, and you can see Plucknett almost similar to that out of the back. The finish is a little bit different though, by today's standards, I would say. So we can see that technique out of the back of the circle. And so now, going into this, the IWAF makes a ruling. It said that urine tests at the Pacific Conference Games last January 31st and February 1st, okay? January 31st, when that happened, there was a urine sample taken from Plucknett's urine. And during that time frame, Plucknett tested positive for traces of anabolic steroids, along with another individual of Australia. Both subsequently won the discus. Mulhall, the other individual from Australia, won the shot put and the discus at those games. So that was in 1981. So now, as we proceed forward, we can see here that the Athletics Congress of the United States and the Amateur Athletic Union of Australia have also been informed of the ruling from the IWAF. In addition, all performances set by the two athletes since the Pacific Conference Games are invalid. Okay, so the IWAF is making the ruling that the throw from Modesto, the throw from Stockholm was invalid. Those performances include 2 world records, 233 7 inches on May 16th in Modesto, California, and 237 feet 4 inches last Tuesday in Stockholm. This statement then comes back to the world record will now revert back to the previous world record held by Wolfgang Schmidt. And so what I want to show you, if I look at the descending order list here, okay, this is the descending order list. You can see Jürgen Schultz has the #1 throw of all time. Virgilius Elecna, 73.88, #2 of all time. If you come down and look at, now we can see, okay, Ben Plucknett, 71.32, the year 1983. So based off of World Athletics, formerly known as the IWAF, Plunknett's best throw was in June of 1983, and that was that throw from Eugene. So both of his best throws in 1981 were banned by the IWAF. So the question becomes, why hasn't the US observed that these bans actually did happen? Now, if we go into a little bit more detail, I'm going to pull out from a Sports Illustrated article. We can actually see here where they're talking about Al Order, they're talking about Plunknett, they were even talking about Mac Wilkins in this article, but they can see here, a week after Plunknett threw 237 feet 4 inches, he took another blow. He was handed an 18-month suspension for testing positive for anabolic steroids from a competition 5 months earlier at a meet in New Zealand. He fought this, but it was denied. But ultimately, TAC, and TAC is what USATF was formerly known as, did recognize it. The IWAF did not recognize it. And so for a while, the US record was actually further than the world record. That has now changed since Jürgen Schultz in 1986 through 243 feet. So it's really just going into further detail then. This whole era here is when everybody starts to talk about drugs. Drugs coming in basically in the late 60s, early 70s. All these throwers very, very likely were all on it back in the day. Now it's a little bit of a different scenario. I think it's a little bit more cleaned up, but there's still obviously going to be some problems. So I wanted to show that right there. Now let's get into these outdoor records. If we see here, and if we remember back to the date, okay, so remember the date, the Pacific Games in New Zealand, where Plunknett first tested positive, was February 1st and January 31st of 1981. That's when his dirty test was taken. So later on, he competed in Modesto in May and threw 71.20, okay? And then again, he threw 72.34 in July. So that was, what, 5-6 months after he had tested positive. Those are seen as legitimate marks by the USATF, including his American record of 72.34. And if we even go in and we look at Wikipedia again, I know I use the example from the World Athletics descending order list, but even if we look at Wikipedia and what that progression of the world record list is, we can actually see here there's no remnants of the 72.34 based from that world recognition. You can see Wolfgang Schmidt, you can see Yuri Domchev, which is another throw that a lot of people have questions about, and then we can see that 74-meter throw from Jürgen Schultz. And if you see the note, on July 7th, 1981, Ben Plunknett won a meet in Stockholm with a world record throw of 72.34, but the record was nullified by the IWAF 1 week later after all of the positive tests were announced. So what is the conclusion here? The conclusion is that he was banned at a certain point, okay? January, February, that's when he tested positive. He was banned in mid-July. If this would happen today, all of these throws would be discounted. Okay, that would not exist. On the American record, the descending order coming down, it would go to John Powell. Okay, so John Powell would currently be the American record holder at 71.26. And then we would start to see Burns, Anthony Washington, Mac Wilkins going down the list. There's our own Alex Rose right here. And we have to start to think about it. I think it's interesting. People will complain about throwing and wind, but they don't complain about guys being on this list with clear drug offenses. And so I think what stinks is that now, here we are in a sport where there's not a lot of lucrative financial opportunities, right? There's not a lot of opportunities to make a lot of money. But if you sign a contract, or if you're even in a situation where you could potentially break the American record, You can receive funding from different organizations, different sponsorships, potentially even further funding from USATF if you break that record, okay, if you break the American record. In this case, in this event, we have a tainted record. One from Modesto, his second one from Stockholm, Sweden. Both should be thrown out the window. If we look at this at all, in fairness, we would be counting his 71.32 as the American record. The problem that I have is going back to this conversation here, just a quote from him in 1982 after he had come back from his drug suspension. I had a definite way of thinking about track before the suspension. It was an innocent view, one of sportsmanship. I felt if I didn't harm anyone, nothing would harm me, but I feel I was made an example. Okay, so he probably knew other people using it and he was the one that got banned. Now he has to look out for himself and trust very few people. So that's one issue I have with that whole entire era. But then even looking at this, going into this further, after his first world record throw, he was surprised he had done so well. I know where I am physically and technically, and this really shouldn't have happened now. I was tired from weightlifting and training. Why had he improved almost 14 feet in a year? It's new confidence in my throwing and training. My whole training routine is different. I don't want to go into details, but every year I add things and take things out. Say what you will, but that does seem somewhat suspicious. And I think that if we're going to be looking at this American record, if we're going to be looking at this 72.34, I believe wholeheartedly that this should not be the American record. And at very best, we should be using the Eugene mark of 71.32. Personally, I have further issues with some of these other marks, especially from that era, especially from based off of word of mouth, from comments like that. But I think for us to move forward and for other athletes that are competing, that are clean all of the time and that are, getting drug tested frequently by USADA. So if the USATF is trying to uphold a standard and take athletes and promote clean sport and promote drug testing consistently, and then hold individuals who are in this sport currently. Look at, you could go on the USADA website and see how many times has someone like Val Allman been tested? How many times has someone like Sam Mattis been drug tested? 19 times. How many times has someone like Brian Williams, another American discus thrower, or Andrew Evans, another American discus thrower, how many times have these individuals been drug tested? We can see what they're competing in. And now for them to go out and potentially try to push towards this American record that has been lengthened tremendously by performance-enhancing drugs. In some cases, Ben Plucknett's case, 14 feet in a single year. We have to analyze that and recognize that there's an error based off of how the USATF is observing this record. So, do I believe Plucknett threw very far? Yes. Was he a good person? Most likely. I never met him. I'm sure he was a really great, fantastic, nice person. However, I do believe based off of the ruling, based off the own ruling of the IWAF, that the USATF does indeed need to change the American record for the men's discus throw, and it needs to happen at some point in the very near future. Comment down below. Let us know what you think. Thanks for tuning in to Throws University. If you guys need help with your programming, if you need help with your technical analysis, you want to become a world-class thrower, head over to throwsuniversity.com. You can pick up a program today. Until next time, peace.